Hi everybody, this is Here with the Birds, back with another Shadowlands video. And in this video, I'd like to walk you through a Mythic Pug of Theatre of Pain from a Holy Paladin perspective. I have for you on the right side my stats going into this without buffs, and also the talent breakdown for this dungeon. You can see here I'm checking out Light's Hammer, and there's a couple of reasons for that I've been testing it out that I'd like to share as we go through this video. And what I'm looking to do is build up a caster version of Holy Paladin that's going to use holy lights, really big beefy holy lights through the inflorescence of the Sunwell legendary. And I'm not recommending that everyone go for inflorescence of the Sunwell. For the particular needs of my raid, I'd like to see how it goes. You'll see once we get to Castle Nathria what our guild is sort of consists of and why I've made these choices. So it's really more of a team choice at the moment. But for those of you who are thinking about picking up a legendary, I would recommend waiting if you can and looking at Shock Barrier. But for my purposes today, I just want to test a little bit more of the ranged approach. What does that mean? It means that we're going to try to add damage with Consecration, Judgment, Hammer of Wrath, fill in with Crusader Strikes a little bit here and there, and then lean on our big HPS throughput abilities, Beacon of Virtue, which is, guys, it's just amazing, honestly. If you have been listening to a bunch of other guides that say it's horrible or it's a crutch or you shouldn't use it, I just want to recommend get into a dungeon and actually test it out. My experience has been that people have not tested out Beacon of Virtue very much because it provides an insane amount of burst healing throughput, and the damage loss is really insignificant. You can still throw your shocks into the boss. You'll see me doing that from time to time. You can judge, you can put Crusader Strike down. All of that's true, but when you watch people who are on the beta trying to push Mythic 15s with Paladin, if you watch people who are doing it now on live, the throughput is not there for Holy Paladin in an AoE scenario. You just don't have the tools, guys. You can toll all you like. You can Aura Mastery and bop sack people all you like, but when the chips are down and you're in deep Prideful and you don't have Avenging Wrath available, you're going to struggle. And Glimmer is not going to add that much. Beacon of Light on your tank isn't going to offer you the kind of recovery throughput that you need. And the people who are playing Glimmer want to add damage, and that's excellent, but it's really not worth the risk for many of us who are going to be playing with people who don't play perfectly. And that's the real rub, is if you're with a group and you have an experience like I'm having right now in this poll where people are making lots of mistakes and standing in bad, perhaps including even myself, there's no wiggle room for you to screw up as a Holy Paladin playing Glimmer in Mythic Plus dungeons. You have to be really sensitive to all of your GCD usage. You have to be very sensitive to all of your cooldown usage. So just be aware of that. For those of you who, like me, admit that I'm not as amazing at this game as I could be, and I'm not always on my top form, or those of you who just think, look at, I need to be able to provide a kind of burst healing, because I know that the people I play with are going to make mistakes, and my job as the healer is actually to try to cover some of that. Then I think you should really be looking at Beacon of Virtue. I'm loving Light's Hammer. Now, why would I say that? As a ranged Holy Paladin, or a Paladin that doesn't mind being at ranged, why would I ever consider this 1 minute cooldown? Well, there's a few reasons for it. In dungeons, it actually does a ton of damage on AoE pulls, and on a 1 minute CD, it's up for a lot of the big pulls that you would expect, especially in Mythic Plus, where you're really planning out your route and wanting to grab as much as you can in an efficient way to burst down mobs. Light's Hammer does a lot of damage. It also transfers through Beacon, so there are 7 ticks of Light's Hammer that go off on 6 members of your party or raid, and all of those ticks will hit your Beacon targets as well. So it matches up really well with Beacon of Virtue as well. You put down Hammer first because it's a longer duration than your Beacon of Virtue, and then you throw down Virtue and you'll get a ton of healing out of that talent. It also moves you away from having to play with Bestow Faith, which is, again, a little bit more GCD intensive. Not as bad as playing Crusader's Might and having to really focus on pressing Crusader Strike all the time. But still, nonetheless, sometimes Bestow Faith is just not the tool that you want to burst heal people back up. Better, in fact, if you're going to play Inflorescence, to lean into your Holy Lights. So, to put it another way, I was finding that the time I had to cast both of my Inflorescence Holy Lights was limited within my shock window. Meaning I would press shock, as you can see here, I would get 2 Inflorescence of Light casts, and then my shock would be ready to go again. So in order not to overlap that, we want to, again, take out of the equation anything that would require me to have a lot of GCDs filled up within that gap. Bestow Faith is still really good, and for those of you who are very interested in moving completely away from melee, I would suggest putting that in your ranged kit. Though everyone's going to tell you ranged is a meme, my advice to you is keep Bestow Faith if you want to stay at ranged for significant amounts of time, because it offers you a bit more of a filler. But what I'm thinking about here is in dungeon settings and perhaps in raid settings where I am going to fill a little bit with Crusader Strike, the amount of time I have to cast my buffed Holy Lights from my Holy Shock proc before I use my shock again are kind of limited. So I wanted to check it out for those 2 reasons. We're also going to be running with Rule of Law, which is growing on me both in general, but also as a talent for dungeons. And part of the reason for that is, as I've said in other videos, Rule of Law interacts in interesting ways with your beacon targeting, meaning that if targets are really far away from the target that you put Beacon of Virtue on, Rule of Law extends the range and it'll actually hit them. So if you have like a mage and a hunter in your group and they are taking a mechanic far away, or they're spread out, maybe Inspires of Ascension is a good example, Rule of Law will allow the Beacon of Virtue to hit those targets reliably. It's also going to buff your mastery whenever you're casting onto your ranged party members, so it'll just make sure that you're getting the maximum value out of that. And you can see here, it's a good example coming up. I'm separated from my party, so I need to spend some time at ranged. I'm going to pop my Rule of Law in a second. After I get out of the window here, you'll see it come up, and that way I can just keep topping them off from a distance. If there was more danger to come, I could guarantee that I'm pouring all of my mastery and I can hit any of those targets as they kite or as they're going away. And kiting is a kind of significant part of any Mythic Plus gameplay if you play it at all in BFA. Sometimes the mobs would just hit too hard, and the tank would be required to kind of kite them around an area. If you're stood still, playing a Holy Light build, it's kind of nice to have Rule of Law to lean on. You do lose your extra horsey, and you lose uptime on your own defensive, and that should not be overlooked, so I don't want to recommend Rule of Law as the spell that you must use, but I think in raids, if you're going to be doing an Inflorescence build, you really should be taking Rule of Law so that you can hit your ranged targets and the people in your raid who are far away. It just had some interesting utility here, and it's only a mythic flat, so I'm not too worried about my own defensives. I don't think I popped it too much. You could use Holy Avenger instead of Divine Purpose, and that's something I'd like to do a bit more testing with. Obviously, this is the go-to spell that Paladins have used to date when they don't have Avenging Wrath in order to help them burst heal up their group. So you can do a Spender and then do a Builder back to back to back during Holy Avenger's CD. But it is a little bit clunky to use, and sometimes you feel like you have to hold it for longer or hold it for a certain pack. And the micromanaging of your CDs in Melee Glimmer in a dungeon is awkward. We don't have to do that too much because we have Virtue, and in fact Divine Purpose synergizes so well with Awakening, giving us lots of uptime on Avenging Wrath that it almost works out anyways. You would have, in other words, Avenging Wrath up at the moments when you were likely to use Holy Avenger anyways, so perhaps Holy Avenger in those cases would have been overkill. Just in terms of the general playstyle, as we move through the middle portion of the Theatre of Pain, some things to note. I didn't talk too much about the bosses and their encounter, because we sort of have been we're flying through it. I think we have a DK and Warrior really just pumping the meters. I don't know any of these people, so I'm anticipating lots of mistakes. But in terms of the gameplay, the flow tends to be get into melee with Judgment, drop your Consecration. If there's 0 damage coming out, build to 5 Holy Power by Shock and Crusader Strike, and then either hold the power or throw it into the tank, and wait for good timings on Blessing of Virtue. Don't cheat on Blessing of Virtue. You're never going to run out of mana in a dungeon. If you're going to use it in a raid, which is ill-advised from most of the community, but I think it's going to be excellent in raids as well, you might need to manage your use of Blessing of Virtue more often, but just toss it out, guys. You can see I'm just pressing it all the time whenever I anticipate that there might be damage. You have to think about it this way. Every time you press Blessing of Virtue, it guarantees in a dungeon that you are going to heal at least 2 targets. So it makes the use of that CD worth it for that amount of time. You can see here, just to break in as an aside, we're pumping out about 6k HPS into this pack. And that is impossible as Glimmer, guys. I'm just telling you, you literally don't have the GCDs available to top people with Word of Glory and Holy Shock. You need to compress your healing into fewer GCDs, and I think Blessing of Virtue is great for that. But just throw it out there liberally, and if there's 2 people that are injured, it's always going to be beneficial because it just converts whatever the next button you press into 2 or 3 heals, and you never know in a pug especially when someone's going to take damage. So I found it so good to just spam it out and keep going. But yeah, you can see the style here. Get into melee if you can, and then be prepared. Try to get your infusion procs, and then be prepared to just lay humongous holy lights. And what I've tended to do is lead my Blessing of Virtue with a holy light cast, just to guarantee the value. So I'll press Holy Light and immediately press, as you saw there, Blessing of Virtue. It guarantees that the Holy Light I cast into the Virtue hits everyone's beacon target. So it kind of cheats a little bit on the duration of Blessing of Virtue. Here we have a bit of a tough situation. This pack, by the way, guys, on Theatre of Pain is particularly deadly. Just a lot of damage coming out. The purple swirls in addition to the tornadoes. So pug groups often go flying off the edge, as you saw here. And I think we actually have a pause here for just a second, and I'll move us ahead to the part where we take on the boss. I had to go for a minute, I think. So we'll just jump ahead here. Pulling the second last boss for our group. A lot of big damage coming out here too with these debuffs, but Virtue's going to help prop us up through it. Again, if you think of it this way, Virtue is allowing me to save on a GCD used on Dispel, because I have 2 targets to manage, and it would take a lot of time to dispel both. You can dispel one or let them run out, and Virtue allows you to lean on that and just convert all of that healing into multiple targets. So yeah, lead your Blessing of Virtues with a Holy Light cast if you can. That'll help get the splash going right away. Holy Light just does a truckload of healing, guys. And other than that, you can just add damage. One of the best parts about this, actually, is the Glimmer build. It always feels like a really dangerous choice to move toward damage or back to healing. And it feels sketchy to me. Whereas with Virtue, I just know, as long as I have Virtue available, I can instantly switch and convert all of my Holy Power into massive AoE healing on demand, and that's what I think is so vital for it in Mythic Plus. In raiding, obviously, there's a little more leeway because you're usually working within a team of healers, but I find Glimmer, how to know when to transition to heal, you have to know the timings exactly. You have to hope that nobody stands in bad, because you can't anticipate your warrior stepping in a swirl and suddenly you have no holy power because you just Shield of the Righteous, and your Holy Shock's coming back up, so you're pressing Crusader Strike instead of healing that warrior who was at 10%. Here I can take lots of time. I'm not too worried. I can lead. Boom! One holy shock with Blessing of Virtue, guys, and you're done. You could go back to damage if you wanted to. You can add more, and these guys all get injured. They all got hit. What are you going to do with Virtue? Boom! One shot. We're back. We're back. Anyways, just thought I would let you guys have a look at a mythic version of Theatre of Pain with this sort of holy light style of play. You can be in melee if you like. You can be at ranged. Either way, here are the talents for you, and then here's kind of what some of the breakdown looks like as far as the healing. You'll have Word of Glory, Holy Shock, and Beacon all quite high depending on the content. So usually Beacon of Virtue will win out the day, especially on packs. Thanks for watching, guys, and we will catch you again next time.